Give me a thank you. Give me a thank you for feminists for getting your right to vote. Otherwise, stop voting and go make me a ham sandwich.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. This is the Rantzerker, but Allison's not here to do her usual spiel, so we let Jank do the intro, and he kind of flubbed it, but whatever. This is Rantzerker number 231, HBR Deboonked. Someone responded to us, is Patriarchy fake news? We are about to get 420 no-scoped by this guy named the Exptriarch, who made a video responding to a video that Allison and I did. I don't even remember what we were talking about, but the topic of patriarchy came up, and Allison essentially made the case that the patriarchy of feminist imagining is not real. And this guy, ex-patriarch, is debunking that. And we are actually dead. We're talking to you from the afterlife, but we are crawling back to the surface with our own counter claims. So anyway, I am here with Hannah and Karen, and Allison will be along later, but she is running late because she is the only person that gets to sleep in, I guess. All right. So, she says, she's ready. Allison's going to be here. So she's going to come now. She's probably going to come in doing the intro. Hold on. I think Anna Kasparian wants to say something too.
Am I saying that I'm better than you? I guess I'm going a little further than you are. Yeah, I'm fucking better than you. Okay? Much better than you. You are garbage.
You are garbage.
Okay.
I have to admit, though, Anna Kasparian is starting to not be such an idiot. Not be such an idiot. She's not anywhere near there yet, but she's at least moving in the right direction.
Yeah, she just had to have some homeless vagrant nearly assault her, and some friend neighborly. He did assault her, and some neighborly MAGA guy help her out, and then she was like, "Wow."
I thought all these MAGA guys were terrorists.
And I thought all these homeless vagrant drug addicts were just the product of socioeconomic factors. I didn't think that.
No. It's like anyway. honestly, you look at something like mental illness. It's like my husband has a cousin. He's got schizophrenia, and every time we get the call that the cops have picked him up again, right? We're just glad it was a suicide attempt and not something involving other people. And it's like, yeah, well, this happened in Canada and it happened in the US, and I think it was in the 1990s or something. They basically decided, the Western world basically collectively decided that it was inhumane to involuntarily commit people who were mentally ill for extended periods of time, for potentially the rest of their lives. And it was also a violation of their rights to make them take medication. And so where did they go? They closed down all the mental hospitals, the long-term facilities. So where did they go? Out on the streets. And what did they do? They stopped taking their medication, and here's where we are.
All right, and Allison just joined us. So, Allison, hey, did you run?
Hey, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, good, because you couldn't hear me before. I've lost the video now. When I went through and did the changes I needed to do so you guys could hear me, it closed the window or it hid it, but I can't find it now. I've got my stuff from HBR Talk open.
Sharing.
I can't see the tab. It's completely vanished. This is bizarre. There it is. It's because I have enough tabs open that my window doesn't show them all to me. So but before we get started on this guy's video, there's two things I want to mention. And the first one is maybe a bit petty, but the name Exptriarch, in my opinion, is very one good man. Our listeners will know what I'm talking about. I mean, it's kind of a way of saying in shorthand, I'm better than all the other men because I recognize this original sin of men that against women that we're all guilty of, and I have to make up for by, lecturing the rest of you guys on how you're supposed to be. It's very condescending. It's very arrogant, and it says a lot about the perspective that this is coming from. And that's the first thing. The second thing is I want people to understand what a Gish Gallop is, because this guy threw out a bunch of claims, and he cited sources for his claims, but he did what some of his sources did. He told part of the story as if it was all of the story, and left it to indicate that that part of the story debunked the argument that that part of the story was not the whole story. It's kind of like saying, I can't go to the store because there's something wrong with my car, and somebody says, well, your car's engine is working just fine, but you have a flat tire.
But the tires are
right.
Yeah.
And so their argument that your car's engine is working just fine doesn't debunk the claim that you can't go to the store 30 miles away because there's something wrong with your car. Or if they claim, well, the store that's 6 blocks from your house is open, but if you've been trespassed out of there and you can't go, you still need your car, and this is the kind of thing that I'm seeing with this video. He did a very excellent job of isolating parts of the story and putting them together in a Gish Gallop, which is saying a whole bunch of arguments at once without any chance to respond in between. So I imagine we're probably going to hear, why did it take you guys such a long video to argue against everything that I said in this lousy 10-minute video? And the answer is because your 10-minute video is a Gish Gallop. I had to deal with that with Kersner. I can't remember her first name. Liana Kersner put out a 15-minute.
The good feminist.
Yeah, the good feminist. Put out a 15-minute Gish Gallop against the men's rights movement. And it took me 45 minutes worth of video to step-by-step address everything she got wrong in that video. So
it's like Goodfella used to say, it's the fire hose style argument. You get a truck full of liquid manure, you spray it all over everything, right? It takes you like a minute to cover everything in manure. It takes a little bit longer to clean that shit up.
Yeah. All right. Well, Allison, you said you wrote something. Did you want to just do that, or should we watch some of the video? Or maybe you should also do the things we literally just started. So, Allison's muted or something. That's why she's been so quiet.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So for some reason, occasionally Video Ninja likes to just drop my mic, and I have to switch it around. But anyway, with that sorted. Okay, so did you do the intro? Have we done the intro?
We did an intro.
Yeah, an intro. Okay. Well, maybe I'll go through and just do the intro and start there. And then we'll go into the things, and we can consider this all bonus content behind the scenes, setting it all up. All right. So coming to you live from deep within a radioactive and strangely timed wasteland. We are the survivors of the alt-right Keck apocalypse, the few, the brave, the bitchy, wading into battle against the lazy citation hordes with Rantzerker, number, help me out here,
231.
231. HBR Deboonked? Or is it Deboonked?
Yeah, we deboonked. We got wrecked.
Wrecked
with logic and facts.
We are we are broadcasting from our own death, from our own afterlife of having been so seriously wrecked by this individual called Exptriarch.
Not just wrecked, we got shreked. We got Tyrannosaurus wrecked.
We got
the weird thing is this does not feel
Deboonked
at all
worse than
like the last time I died.
Yeah, well, I also died recently. I've been dying on this hill for 20 years. So, but anyway, I want to remind everyone, if you would like to send us a tip, and with that tip, send a comment, you can do so at feedthebadger.com/justthetip. We do have our monthly fundraiser open at feedthebadger.com/support. So if you want to support this content, which is, it's pretty unique content, I would say. You can do so at feedthebadger.com/support. All right. So Brian sent this to me yesterday at about noon. And I went into the comments and I started commenting, shall we say. And I had watched a bit of the video and I actually read the sources, or I looked at the sources. I already read Blackwell's commentaries on the laws of England, but he also had another source called Laws Concerning Women. Let me see. A brief summary in plain language of the most important laws concerning women. And so I took a look at that. It is, I think it's something that both Karen and Hannah are probably familiar with. It is
maybe not. Maybe not.
Okay.
I don't
maybe,
tend
maybe
to
not.
read
I'll send you a link, but
Yeah.
I'll give you an overview. It's essentially a feminist or proto-feminist document about the laws of the time. It rehashes Blackwell's commentaries on the laws of England, and then adds a bit of commentary about how everything is men's fault. They're harming women, and they're evil, and also they're less morally capable than women. They're lower than women on the moral landscape. Which always I find hilarious when I read these feminist documents from the time, because they contrast so interestingly with, for example, at the time they would have called themselves like the Negro League, but that's not appropriate today. So the League of like Black voters, and they would create documents talking about the franchise, and they would talk about their service, and they never said things like, because we are morally superior to the white race.
Yeah.
Never always talked about the service that they've performed for their society and warfare and that kind of stuff, and then laid out their argument for having the vote as a result of that. Completely different tone when you listen to feminist or proto-feminist writings. It's always, as the morally superior gender, we are going to pontificate upon the failings of the men in providing for us. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking about the whole context of what she's writing in. So there were a lot of social changes happening in the 19th century, one of which was the creation of a workplace that was safe, secure, and comfortable enough for women to go into, right? So now we're starting to see women bringing their own income into marriage, which is a completely new situation. In the past, women worked from the home, not because they were restricted by law, but because they were restricted by biology. Like they didn't have the physical strength to do a lot of the jobs that were outside the home. The jobs outside of the home were uncomfortable and difficult. They didn't have accommodations like washrooms, right? And so it was, and in many cases, they were extremely dangerous. Like the tunnel under the Thames probably has a death toll in the dozens, and men were doing that. They were tunneling under the Thames. So that was the kind of jobs that were available at the time. Then we see the rise of this sort of clerk class. So jobs you can do at a desk, you can do mentally, and there was less barriers to entry. And those barriers were biological and physical. So you see women taking more jobs. Now, the laws regarding marriage weren't, they by definition, laws tend to come from the past. So they didn't accommodate this new circumstance. But it wasn't because men hated women. Actually, can I just ask, Hannah, if you're not speaking, could you just mute? Because there's just this little zzz, and it's like it's triggering my.
Okay, well, I'm kind of waiting to say something as soon as you get done, because
I'll give you a heads up. I'll give you a heads up. All right.
Yeah, it's just, and I don't know that this is going to change. Like I switched everything that I could, and this is just
it's not bothering me anymore.
Actually
so as long
just
as it's
be
only
local
bothering
interference.
Allison, I'm good.
Okay.
So, well, the problem is if I don't stay unmuted, I don't get to talk a lot of the time. So I was.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna complete my skeep spiel, and then I'm gonna let both of you just go for it. I'm just gonna release the hounds on this guy. But what I was trying to get at is that the circumstances, the social circumstances of the time had changed. Laws didn't keep up with it. So what simply happened is there was a new circumstance that had to be dealt with in law when it came to matrimony, which is women bringing in their own income. Before, that just didn't happen. Women's contribution to the family was material, but it wasn't in terms of bringing in currency, bringing in money, right? So as soon as they realized, oh, hey, wow, this is something that's going to harm married women, they started to change the law. It has nothing to do with men being cruel or evil, which is sort of the implication of this sort of misandrous screed. It had everything to do with a delay in the law recognizing and dealing with a current circumstance. And you see this over and
Politics is
over again.
downstream from culture.
Yeah, it's like you see this over and over again. It takes time for the law to catch up with current circumstance. And then in the lag, you find the feminists yelling about how men hate us and they're evil and they want to oppress us. No, and then you find that yes, the law gets changed. And interestingly enough, the law gets changed in such a way that women are benefited. In other words, so it's changed that they are the ones who no longer face the problems that they did, but new problems are created for men. So, for example, women can keep their income and control their income because they're earning it. But now we have the problem that men are responsible for debts. And they have no ability to have oversight. Because you have an anecdote about that, Karen. So it's like it creates a problem. This change between this differential between the law and the circumstances that married people find themselves in creates a problem for women. The legal process solves that problem for women, and then creates a gigantic problem for men because their responsibilities remain. Right? And it's always lagging. The problem is solved first for women. Then egregious crap happens because nobody thought about the situation for men because of biased advocates like this person who wrote this treatise. Nobody thinks about the situation for men. It takes a decade or longer to fix the problems that are created for men, which they have really serious consequences like jail. And and it's so interesting that they frame all of this. Circumstances changing, the law not keeping up because the law doesn't keep up, right? The law being changed to benefit women. Nobody thinking about the situation for men. The situation for men only being addressed decades after the situation for women is being addressed. They look at all that and say, oppression of women. Bitch, please.
So there's also the factor of class that people do not think about when they're discussing this. Like the idea that women didn't work before a certain time and then after that time women worked does not apply when you get below what we would today think of as the middle class, which was almost non-existent at certain times because class was based on land ownership, and land ownership made you wealthy. You didn't have middle status, unless you were living in an urban area and you owned a small section of land on which one building could stand and other people would rent it from you. So this idea that women were forbidden to work is just not the case. Women were not forbidden to work because poor women had jobs, and it wasn't just cleaning people's houses. It was working in coal mines. It was all kinds of stuff. They worked in factories. They worked in dangerous conditions. They were still shielded from the more dangerous conditions in the workplaces that they were in. So if there was an area in a coal mine that was more dangerous, the men were the ones doing that, whereas women did jobs that you had to be maybe a little smaller to be able to do. And it was upper class women whose objections led to women being taken out of coal mines, to poor women being taken out of coal mines. And then they ended up having to do slightly lower paying jobs outside of the mines for the coal companies instead. And the conditions weren't necessarily significantly better because now they were working outside in the cold in the wintertime and outside in the heat in the summertime, whereas down in the mines, the temperature was pretty much a constant. So you did have a very stark difference between how the law affected women who married wealthy men and property owners versus women who married men who didn't have much of anything. And feminists never talk about
that. Or who didn't marry at all.
Yeah, or who didn't marry at all. Women who didn't marry at all had to be self-supporting. They didn't have somebody that was obligated to support them, and they had to face all of the things that women who were married didn't have to face because their husband was legally designated as a shield between them and the state. And so you also saw women working in dangerous conditions and in legally risky conditions, business owners and so on. And there were women that became wealthy as business owners. Right on back into medieval times. There were landladies and such. This is information.
on
A lot
back
of this
into
is
Roman
information. Yeah. And a lot of this is information we came across when we were doing the HBR Talk series, debunking the idea that there's no relationship between military service and voting rights. Like voting rights
Yeah.
literally evolved out of men's military obligations and their obligations to participate in a pseudo-parliamentary system prior to the existence of the British parliamentary system. It's literally one and the same thing. And women got voting rights along the way multiple times in multiple ways. There was no stark line where before this time all men could vote and no women could vote. And after, it was equalized, there was always this long, slow evolution of men's voting rights in association with actions men took for remedy that men needed for their ability to provide for their families and keep their communities safe,
and also
and
service
not
and
have to
wartime.
pay the king to do stupid things. Warfare. The story of King John, basically, and his contribution to that, everybody should know. So, I mean, we've been going over that at HBR Talk for months, and we're doing something else right now because there's some stuff that's very relevant to right now that needs to be covered right now. So we've gotten up to after the American Revolution, and we will be going back to this at a later date and continuing on with the formation of Canada, the formation of Australia, and how voting rights evolved in all of the territories that were once English colonies and other English territories. Yeah, under English common law, right? Because that's basically what affected the formation of voting rights in all those countries. And there were differences, significant differences in how that occurred because the American Revolution changed the entire world's attitude about how that should work. But in all of that, what this goes back to is a lot of what this guy has said is overgeneralization, and he omits a lot of important facts. And it's very important to not do the same thing where we say, well, this was the way things were for women up until this point, and that's the way things were for women afterwards, because which women are we talking about? Are we talking about the women who came from wealthy families, or are we talking about the women who came from poor families?
We're also talking about rural versus urban women, because when Blackwell does his commentaries on the laws of England, he means different law systems. Like there's certain areas that might have a Saxon inheritance laws, which were strict progenitor, I think, like the first male heir. There would be ones that were more based on Roman law. That has much more, like Roman law has much more latitude for female inheritance. I think women are equally considered in terms of inheritance as sons, and a lot of English common law comes from Roman common law, Roman law. So he's talking,
but you also have to, but you also have to look at those Saxon laws. The eldest the eldest son gets everything. He gets everything, and then the second son goes to the military, and the third son goes to the
right. And there were reasons for that. There were very solid reasons for that. The inheritance law was intended to keep properties and wealth intact. So if you had several children and you let each of them take a piece of your land, that land then went off into different families, and it became smaller sections, and it was less valuable. And especially if it went off into the control of another family because you left it to a woman, didn't shield it from her coverture rights. And so since she could exercise her right to not be responsible for it, her husband then had a right to exercise his responsibility for it as he saw necessary. It wasn't subject to whims, but it was definitely subject to his judgment. And so that would mean that the
Yeah.
original family that
he was
owned
the
that land,
administrator, the CEO.
right? He was the administrator. That meant that the other family just lost control over it, right?
Yeah.
Her father's family just lost control over it.
The
So
overall
it
point
wasn't about the individuals who were inheriting the land. It was about the preservation of wealth and the preservation of a system that had to do with royalty.
Yeah, but my overall point is that Blackwell's commentaries is dealing with a bunch of different legal systems. I mean, they're
Mhm.
evolving into each other, and so you
Yeah.
have certain courts that would decide based on different principles. And so there's the old English common law, and
Yep.
there's this new law where the coverture is coming in, and he's explaining all of this. And the inclination I've seen is to treat all of it as one thing, and it isn't. So women in different jurisdictions would be under different types of law. They might be under the old English law, which gave them more freedom, but also gave their husbands more authority over punishing them for misdemeanors. Or they might be in the new law, which is more coverture, where they had less, I don't want to say freedom. They had less, or men had more responsibilities to essentially manage their wives' property. But on the other hand, men didn't have the same like authority to engage in any kind of correction. And when we talk about correction, men weren't allowed to engage in just violence. That had to be in the context of a woman's misbehavior, misdemeanors, right? So she had to actually be a problem for other people before this became his issue. But the other thing is that there is absolutely no controls on women's violence. This is what I've said. Yeah, if feminists want to assert men could hit their wives with a stick no bigger than their thumb, their wives had every legal right to hit them with a baseball bat.
The
or
rule
a
of
freaking spoon.
thumb has been
I know, it's
debunked for a
bullshit.
long
Yeah,
time.
I know.
Women
I'm
were
just
not
saying.
allowed to beat their
Wait.
wives.
Let's.
This is really important. Men were
We
not
know,
allowed to beat their
but
wives.
if you
I'm saying we know. Okay, Brian, what is it you need?
Well, I just
Okay.
want Allison to finish her thing.
both of you.
All right, but that's just we
It
shouldn't
depends.
give them that. It didn't
It
depend. Men were
depends
not allowed
on
to
what
beat their
you mean
wives.
by beat. It
Yes.
depends on what you mean by beat.
Laws against
Don't
wife
worry,
beating
Brian.
went
what
all
you mean
the way
by
back
beat.
to year
Okay?
1000.
Because
All right,
men
one at a
have
time,
the power
otherwise
of
nobody can hear.
corporal punishment. Corporal punishment was permissible by men against anyone whom they were legally responsible for. That means you got your backside whacked.
Spanked.
That's what that means. And these days, we consider that, yes, you got spanked, you got caned, whatever, right? Like this happened in schools when I was a kid. The principal would give students the strap when they were misbehaving. They would always offer, do you want it? Do you want the strap, or do you want me to call your parents and tell them what you did? And the boys who were in trouble always took the strap. They always opted for the strap, right? Okay, which is a leather strap whacked against their palm. Okay, this is okay because parents were allowed to spank their kids. Parents were allowed to do a lot of things to their kids. No TV, right? No playing outside. No bike. Take your bike away, put it in the shed, lock it in there, right? These kids generally knew in the 1970s that they would get it worse at home than one single leather strap against their hand. Okay, so we consider that violence today. We consider that beating today. We consider that abuse today. That is not how things were considered back then. So when you say men were not allowed to beat their wives, yeah, no, they were allowed to physically correct, to use corporal punishment on their wives, on their apprentices, on their children, on anybody who they could be held criminally responsible for.
Okay, thank you,
Right,
Karen.
physical punishments at the time that were allowed to be used by the state, at the time that you're saying that men could use a strap on their wives, were things like
paddling.
cutting people's limbs off, or putting someone in a mechanism where they essentially were stuck in a giant stairmaster until they died. They used hanging,
Yeah,
they used
yeah.
dismemberment, they used all kinds of torture and so on.
Drawing and
So
quartering.
we're essentially trying to equate
Yeah,
the things that were normal in the past that would be considered much more lenient than your normal
yeah, we're looking
punishments
at
with
the
today's.
past.
So no, men were still not
a
allowed to beat their
paddling.
wives. So
A
it's not
paddling
really.
is
And
was
there's
not
more
it's
to
not
this.
considered
Let
violence.
Karen, let Hannah finish.
Even before the year 1000. This is from let me make sure MJ George in his report Skimmington Revisited pointed out, even before the year 1000, Anglo-Saxon men who were found guilty of assaulting a woman had to pay her recompense according to their crime. And he has a source for that. Lacey and Danziger, 1999. In the Elizabethan period, court records became more systematic, and many have survived, allowing later historical analysis. Such records show that domestic disputes and violence were a considerable portion of indictments for violence brought to the courts. And that was Cockburn, 1977. Although they contained cases between all manner of domestic relations, certainly examples of the prosecution of men for violence against their wives can be found over the entire period since then. And he has 3 sources for that.
Yep.
So women, if they felt that what their husband did was unjust or was overboard in terms of violence, and there was any, like, say he left a bruise, a welt, anything like that, she could still go to court and force him to pay compensation. And a lot of remedies for stuff that was a dispute between people, if there was violence between people at a pub, instead of a criminal remedy where you got a punishment from the state, because punishments from the state were so harsh, those were civil remedies. So this was pretty normal. A woman could go after her husband for exercising his right to discipline her too harshly. Meanwhile, if a man was subjected to violence by his wife, the entire town would turn up to punish him for it.
Yeah.
And which, like you
shame
cited
him.
the Skimmington, they shamed him, and they actually would beat him for getting beaten by his wife.
Yeah.
So it was not equal at all.
No, it wasn't equal, and the protection was granted towards the women. Where there was protection, it was granted towards the women. And like you said, when I went through Blackwell's commentaries, and also I want to point out, this is what I was trying to point out. Blackwell points to the Old English law as giving men the right of correction. And that is in the context that they can prove that she is engaging in behavior that is probably a danger to people around her. Like, so that she's engaging in behavior that people would agree is egregious and deserves correction. Instead of going to the courts and getting one of these sort of draconian punishments, he is responsible for punishing her, right? That's the situation.
Yeah.
But Blackwell points out that after the reign of Charles II, that started to evolve away from men being able to do anything. So under coverture, men aren't actually allowed to physically chastise their wives. They have more responsibility and less authority under coverture, which is astounding that they look at that and say, oh, women are oppressed by this. Okay. But here's and you read Blackwell.
Oh, and you want to do the no one good man thing too. It's like he's like, oh, those horrible savage men back then certainly did this, but we in the age of
Blackwell
Charles
II,
you know, we're more enlightened.
Yeah. Even Blackwell is doing the whole "I am the expatriarch" thing that Exptriarch is doing, because every generation of men thinks it's the only generation of men that's ever treated women right. Like, and then the next generation of men says to its fathers, "You don't treat women right." Like it's this continuous so-called revolution. But what my overall point is that Blackwell wasn't just talking about the old English common laws. He was also talking about the additions and changes to it and you need to make these distinctions. But there is one thing that I will give expatriarch. I'm going to keep saying expatriate because that's what I'm thinking when I because I lived in an expatriate. But anyway, the one thing that I will give expatriarch is that he at least restricts it. Because I've dealt with people who have come out and said women were oppressed throughout all of European history. I'm like, okay, so you don't think they were oppressed in ancient? Oh yeah, they were also oppressed. How about Sumer? Yes, so that women were oppressed in every legal system that's ever existed. I'm like, can we narrow it down?
Yeah.
Can we talk? Because there's different situations that each of these legal codes are dealing with. Are we dealing with like the North Germanic laws, the like the Scandinavian Middle Ages? Are we dealing with Saxon? Are we dealing with Roman? Are we dealing with English common law? Are we dealing with later English common law? Like, what are we dealing with? But at very least, he talks about coverture, which is sort of a specific legal. It's not even just a specific legal law system. It's also a specific legal scenario. What would you term that? Like a specific legal.
Well,
term.
there's a time frame
relationship-
there,
the
and
relationship between husbands
Yeah.
and wives.
Yeah, it's
there's
specific.
a time frame and a specific set of laws under
So
a
at least
specific
we've narrowed
system.
it down.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
Yeah, at least we've narrowed it down to something. We're not just
Well,
talking about the entirety of European existence.
although he does seem
I
to rely
would
heavily
argue-
on
I would-
Blackwell, and I mean, there's been critiques of Blackwell, and Mary Beard, for instance, in 1946, kind of ripped Blackwell a new asshole in regard to this. So
Yeah, and
it's
give us a review of that.
oh gosh, so
Well-
we're talking about an entire book here. But I can
Yeah, we
respond with
haven't- we
bits and
haven't even
pieces of it as
started
we go through
watching.
the video.
Yeah,
Because there's a
and
couple of
maybe
things.
we should watch the video that we're here to respond to.
Yeah, maybe.
It's only been 45 minutes almost. Okay, so and I'd like to go home today, or like go pick Lindsay up at some point. So
Oh
Yeah.
God, we knew that we were in for it when we're talking about law, though, with Karen.
yeah,
and
yeah,
Hannah.
yeah. No, it's
I mean,
okay. I
just-
know. I fully expect it. I only have like a couple of. It's a 9-minute video, but it really only breaks down into 3 sections. There's an intro. There's a bit about coverture, and then the evolution of women's rights in law.
Well, why,
And I never
then-
even
why don't
got
we sit?
finished.
Why don't we just sit through the intro with minimal interruptions?
Yeah,
Okay.
well, we'll just play the bit where he sort of like sets it up, and then I'm going to jump ahead, okay? So
Okay.
let's all
Okay.
not say anything, because if you talk, it changes scenes. So try not to make any noise or anything while I play the intro. Wait, why-
Feminists characterized as men oppressing women. No, look at the historical norms. There was always an expectation that men serve women's comfort and make sure women are protected and provided for to the expense of men themselves. This patriarchy is feminist patriarchy has never been proven.
It's another round of these are not facts, they're just things you made up to justify your feelings.
Okay, that's basically the intro. Did you guys know that all of the books and all of the studying and all of the stuff that you've done is just your feelings? And that's what you're like. These
You know,
people
I
project,
really
they project
wonder.
so hard. Okay,
It
Yeah.
would be something that a feminist man would do, that he would assume that something a woman said, an opinion that a woman holds, was just because that's her feelings.
hmm
Yeah, no, she's just being overly emotional. A hysterical woman. Maybe she needs a hysterectomy and some of that good vibrator freaking therapy that they were dishing out to women, mentally ill women back in the like late 1800s, early 1900s.
All right.
Who
so
knew
now-
that female orgasm was a cure for female mental illness?
All the hallucinations go away. From
Certainly sounds
schizophrenia.
more fun than
Yeah.
All right, let's
sounds more
play.
fun than a lot of the therapies like the electroshock and shit like that. So
Yeah, let's play the
All
bit
the
where he
facts
talks about
without speaking on
coverture, and then you guys, I'll pause it, and when I do, you guys could talk, but don't say anything for now. Okay, here we go.
Married women were not allowed to own property. Any property she owned as a single woman now became her husband's. Any wages or income she now earned as a married woman were similarly no longer hers, but owned by her husband. A married woman could not be sued. Any debts she incurred would be passed to her husband, but she was also not allowed to enter into any contracts nor make any purchases without her husband's approval and consent. If a married woman was injured, she could not sue, but her husband could on her behalf. Any damages he received were his alone. Barbara Lee Smith.
Okay, everything you just said there is an oversimplification in a way that makes it not true. He has stated fractions of truths as if they are the entire story. So, yeah, women, if they opted to not make any arrangements when they were getting married to protect their property from becoming completely controlled by their husband, they were agreeing to that, and that would be the situation. But there were legal arrangements that could be made where the woman retained control of the property herself, where the woman had a trustee in control of the property who was not part of her family, or where the woman actually left it in the control of her father or part of her family. So this idea that patriarchy just kept women from having control over any of their property after they got married, that was baloney. And this is one of the things that and you guys have to understand. I actually have about 80 tabs open here, so I want to make sure I'm looking at the right one. Yeah. So what? Then I'm going to read this. What Mary Beard said was, "Did a woman, after all, cease to exist in law in respect to her property rights when she married?" Story answered, and she's citing another author here, Courts of Equity, which Blackwell kind of ignored.
Yes.
For many purposes, treat the husband and wife as the civil law of Rome treats them, as distinct persons capable in a limited sense of contracting with each other, of suing each other, and of having separate estates, debts, and interests. A wife may, in a court of equity, sue her husband and be sued by him. In cases respecting her separate estate, she may also be sued without him, although he is ordinarily required to be joined for the sake of conformity to the rule of law as a normal party whenever he is within the jurisdiction of the court and can be made a party. Do contracts made between a man and a woman before their marriage become utterly extinguished after they are married? It depends upon the nature of the contracts. Courts of equity will, in special cases, in furtherance of the manifest intentions and objects of the parties, carry into effect such a contract made before marriage between the husband and wife. So basically what they wrote in the contract could determine that the contract would survive the marriage agreement. And even though there was the legal fiction of coverture, and anything that was addressed by that particular contract was exempted and excluded from it. And it goes on. Let's see. Sorry, I'm using two screens too. An agreement therefore entered into by the husband and wife before the marriage for the mutual settlement of their estates, or the estate of either upon the marriage, even without intervention of trustees, will be enforced in equity though void at law. For equity will not suffer the intention of the parties to be defeated by the very act which is designed to give effect to such contract. Meaning that based on the intentions of that contract, them getting married, which is intended to act as another contract, doesn't eliminate the original contract. In equity, it is a constant experience that the husband may sue the wife or the wife the husband, where a husband covenanted before marriage with his intended wife that she should have the power to dispose of her estate. He was afterwards held bound significantly to perform it. He wasn't allowed to go back on his word. The same rule in equity was applied in cases where the woman bound herself to her intended husband any portion of her estate. So if she gave up the estate, she couldn't come back later and say, I changed my mind. And there's more, but
no, and
Blackwell pretty much ignored that in his writing.
Yeah, no, and you also have to look too at the fact that like probably 85% of women came into the marriage with their personal effects. Their clothing, right? Their toiletries, their hairbrush, right? Maybe some linens, like a little trousseau that contained some household items that they hope to bring into the marriage, right? So bed linens and washing linens and things like that. Maybe, you know, like some appliances, small appliances, and all of the rest. Like they did not come into the marriage. 85% of women probably did not come into the marriage with any property worth going to court over, right? They didn't come in with 30 head of cattle. They didn't come in with a cottage, you know, out at Gretna Green or something like that. They weren't coming into the marriage with any real property or substantive chattel property. They were coming into the marriage basically with their skill set as a domestic laborer and their personal effects and maybe a handful of household goods, right? Housewares. And that's it. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, and like Karen or Hannah said, this is like a lot of this doesn't even consider class. Like this, what I'm getting from Karen is that a lot of what he's calling out wouldn't even apply to women who are not rich. So
Yeah, no, it wouldn't. It wouldn't.
Once again, feminists are looking at the situation of rich women and distorting it. Well, what a surprise that feminists are looking at the situation of rich women, because that's what they are.
I know. And it's like, who was it? Fawcett. What was her first name?
Farrah Fawcett?
Millicent.
Millicent?
Yeah, definitely not Farrah Fawcett. Millicent Fawcett, I think, is who you're talking about.
That's the only Fawcett I know.
Yeah, no, okay.
It's the only Fawcett worth remembering.
she was the wife of a wealthy man. She was wealthy in her own right, and she was going about her life, having her career, right? Earning her money that she spent, you know, like however she pleased, right? Because her husband was perfectly happy for her to do that, right? And then she's walking down the street and somebody snatches her purse and they go to court when the guy is charged and the bailiff reads out that, you know, 20 pounds of her husband's money was stolen from her purse. And that was her inspiration, right? To spearhead the law changes that basically made every wife's money, right? Every wife's income, every wife's property to be theirs, held fem sole, as if they had never married, right? Every wife now, right, in Britain would own their own property that they brought into the marriage. It was theirs alone. He couldn't touch it. He wasn't even allowed to, because it's her private finances, to know how much money she had, to know how much property she had, because that's her personal private financial information, held as if she was still a single woman, right? And he had no right to know about it. But he still owed the tax burden. He still owed the taxes on her property and income. That was paid, and he still had the burden.
Let her finish. This is a great story.
I thought she was.
He still had the freaking burden of supporting the entire family, including her, right, to the best of his ability. So if he was wearing Hugo Boss suits, she was wearing Dolce & Gabbana, okay, at his expense. She didn't have to pay for it, right? And if she ever had to, maybe he, I don't know, lost in a business venture or lost some money or whatever, got swindled, right? And she ever had to support the family, right? Him and the kids for any length of time. He owed her that money back, right? She could keep track of every dime of her money that she spent supporting her husband and her kids and then sue him and get all of it back, okay, from him, right? And Mark Wilkes was a school teacher. This is in 1910, I believe, in Britain. Elizabeth Wilkes, his wife, was a physician. back when women weren't allowed to work or have careers, mind you, or even get educations. Okay. She was a physician. He was a school teacher. She was also a suffragette, right? So, which basically means she was a cunt. She was an absolute fucking voracious, self-centered, self-serving cunt who did not care about how her actions affected other people, right? All she wanted was what she wanted, and what she wanted was the vote for women. So what she, 10-pound suffrage for women. You can't let those plebs, right? Those, the poors, you can't let the poors vote, right? No, we want 10-pound suffrage for women, right? 10-pound poll tax so that only us wealthy propertied women are able to vote equally with the men. Okay, so she decided that she was going to join a tax resistance society, okay, and start a tax resistance movement where married women would refuse to pay their taxes, okay, and out of their incomes, out of their property, right, would refuse to pay the taxes and refuse to give their husband the documentation necessary for their husbands to calculate the taxes owing, right? And maybe in the case of Elizabeth and Mark Wilkes, right? She's richer than him and he can't afford to pay it, even if he knew how much he had to pay.
Yeah,
Okay?
let me just ask a question to get this straight. Can I just ask a question to get this straight? All right. So she earns a tremendous amount of money. She supposedly has to pay taxes, but she doesn't have to pay them because her debts are her husband's responsibility and he has to pay them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is oppression of women. Okay.
He went to jail and this is after Millicent or whatever her freaking name was, Fawcett, right, had the laws changed to solely benefit women without considering the position and responsibilities of the husband. Okay, so this is fallout from this law change that feminists push for, right? So Mark Wilkes is called up in court on tax evasion charges, and he pleads that, number one, he's impecunious. He cannot afford to pay the taxes, whatever they are, because he's a mere school teacher, right? And his wife has all this property and all of this income, okay? He can't afford to pay it. And up until recently, she's always happily paid it herself because that was the deal that they came to between each other, right? But not only was she refusing to pay it, she wouldn't even show him the documentation of what she owned and how much she earned, so he couldn't even figure out how much he had to pay, even if he could pay it. So they put him in prison.
What point?
They put him in prison.
What point was she trying to make with all this?
Oh, no tax, no vote. No vote, no tax for women. If we don't get the vote, you don't get the taxes. Okay.
So
government.
this entire little escapade is no vote for. Well, then you should be legally obligated to pay your own taxes if you.
That's right. If it's your vote, then it should be your taxes.
Your taxes, because these are his taxes, not your taxes. Like, and she. Okay, so this is just a this is why I called her the C word, right? The see you next Tuesday word. Is because she happily let him sit in prison, right? She knew his health was bad already, right? She let him sit in prison for months, right? While she was out on the streets talking to reporters and everything and holding protests and stuff and encouraging all other propertied women, because suffragettes are generally women of property, she said, encouraging them to do the same, to follow suit. And any husband worth his salt would happily go to prison for this just cause for his wife and all of her rich cunt friends. Okay, and eventually there was such a freaking stir in the media over her talking about this, her promoting this, right?
And like it was such an outrage, such a controversy, that this man was sitting in prison, right, rotting away in poor health, right, that the court gave him reprieve based on humanitarian grounds and let him out of prison, and then he died a few months later.
So
Yep.
let me get this all straight.
These are your fucking heroes, people.
Yeah, let me summarize this. So this woman, this suffragette, was doing a protest saying no tax, no vote, no tax, but she wasn't legally obligated to pay her own tax. So when she didn't pay her tax, her husband went to jail, and apparently it destroyed his health, and he died later. And this is oppression of women. This is what you call oppression of women. Like, answer for this, patriarch. Answer to this. Tell us how this is oppression of women, because it doesn't look like oppression of women from where I'm standing. If men are constantly obligated to women's debts and women's comfort and providing for women, and to the point where a woman can pull off a stunt like this, send her husband to jail, you explain how this is oppression of women.
And smugly talk to reporters about how all propertied women should be doing the exact same thing.
Well, thank God they didn't.
And of course it was limited to propertied women, because the women who were not propertied did not agree with her. They didn't agree
and they
with
didn't have to pay
suffragettes.
taxes either.
They didn't want the vote. When the suffragettes began campaigning, the anti-suffragette movement outnumbered them immensely.
Yeah.
Okay, we did a couple of episodes, at least maybe 3 or 4, just on the anti-suffragette movement and the fight between the suffragettes and the anti-suffragettes, because it took years for the suffragettes to pressure the anti-suffragettes into basically just shutting up and going along with what they wanted. And during that time period, all of the stunts that the suffragettes pulled, they claimed that they spoke for all women, but they fought very hard to keep other women's opinions from being heard, much less considered. So there were pushes for women to vote, for instance, on whether or not women wanted voting rights. And the suffragettes opposed that because they didn't think that women would vote the way they wanted them to.
Yep. No,
So,
and
there was a
all
lot
this,
of that.
Oh God, and in the UK, right? Like there's a book called The Suffragette Bombers, and like they were bombing monuments and government buildings. They were
Mailboxes.
lacing mailboxes with.
They tried to murder a member of parliament.
Yeah, they tried to push him off a cliff, and out of his sense of chivalry, he did not report them to police. But women were oppressed.
Yeah. Yup. So this fiction that women were kept out of any legal recourse, and women were kept out of property ownership. Like, there's another bit that I should read you from this book. Is Blackstone's statement true or false? What is its real nature? For the moment, it may be said that there are some truths in it, that it contains a great deal of misleading verbalism, and that in upshot it is false. We must remember, moreover, very distinctly that he was, at this point in his commentaries, dealing solely with the rights or rightlessness of married women only, with her position, as he said, in law, quote, in law.
Yeah.
Now, the words in law actually meant in common law. Blackstone so understood it, and understood it as a qualification in all of the passage. So did his readers who were trained in law. In the common law was, however, only one branch of English law, one of the laws of England, or bodies of law. Other bodies of law were acts of parliament, often drastically modifying the common law, and old customs left undisturbed by the common and statutory laws. And as Blackstone remarked casually, over and above these laws was equity, frequently called in to assist, to moderate, and to explain the other laws. It was equity administered by a special court, having no jury, that provided in the name of justice remedies for wrongs for which the common law afforded no remedies. And it goes on later To just another paragraph here. Besides, there were the private practices and agreements of men and women in the ordinary affairs of daily living, which, as a rule, prevailed undisturbed unless perchance they became involved in actions before the courts and were declared illegal, contrary to law or good morals. Only when such practices and agreements were notoriously contrary to law or good morals, or the man or woman who were parties of such practices and agreements were entangled in litigation, was there any kind of law applied to them. So it wasn't. Okay, it looks like Brian's back. All right.
Hold your thought and continue as long as are we back, Brian? Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Yeah. I never left. You guys did, and then you came back.
Oh,
I don't
okay,
know what that
okay.
Okay,
was,
all right.
so.
Continue.
So
Alright.
that was weird.
Yeah, it's a little
Alright.
weird.
So basically, all of this complaint, right, that the law somehow restricted women in ways that affected their everyday lives on the profound level that he's describing was just utter bullshit. Most of the time, unless a husband actually exercised the force of using the court system, or a business decided to get, act against their own economic interests and start denying women access, this really did nothing. She could walk in there, and as long as her husband was paying his bills, she could say, I'm buying in his name, and they didn't question it.
Yeah, it was the law of agency, and
Right.
he actually had to, like, because it was actually I forget, coverture, oppression or privilege paper, right? That said that, it wasn't enough for a man to like post a notice, in the middle of town,
Yeah,
or
no, he had to go
or
to every single
he had
store
to
and
go to
say,
every store and say, my wife's
don't extend
overspending.
to my wife.
Don't give her my credit.
Yeah, my wife is living with her lover.
Yeah.
I have a divorce from room and board. Stop extending her credit.
Yeah,
Right.
no, and like women, and this paper actually noted that women who were legally separated from their husbands used to leverage the law of agency to rack up enormous debts in their husbands' names in order to strong arm them into cushier settlements in terms of alimony, right? So you're looking at like women using the privilege that the laws gave them, the coverture laws at the time gave them, in order to strong arm their husbands into settling for more, to pay more alimony, so that they could, live a cushier lifestyle post separation, because divorce was needed an act of parliament at the time. And so there were very few that were actually granted. But, like, and you see it like in certain Muslim countries, right? Women, they are able to divorce on a number of grounds. If they don't have grounds, they give up, right, their bride gift, right, their mar or Maria, right?
Yeah.
They have to give it up, at least the portion of it that wasn't paid up front, right? Because usually it's a small portion paid up front, and the rest is a paper debt, right, payable on divorce if he divorces her without cause or she divorces him with cause. But the list of causes for her to divorce is like, if he has a job that I find personally embarrassing, right,
No.
is like legal cause to divorce in certain Muslim countries, right?
If she
For a
feels
woman.
neglected sexually.
If he hasn't impregnated her within the first 5 years of the marriage, if he can't perform sexually.
Yep.
Oh yeah, that was in the Middle Ages too. But I think the overall point here that's being made, because we probably should get back to the video,
there's
is
more
that he's
to
relying on Blackstone, and that's not a good idea.
There's
He's
more to
relying
this
solely on
discrediting of Blackstone that I should point out here, because this is something, this pretty much repeats what I said before, but it it solidifies it a little bit. And we've actually got this chick in our vertical chat who either didn't show up till later in the show or didn't listen because she's repeating things that we've already discredited.
Yeah,
so
well, they do that.
it goes on. Yet when Blackstone spoke of the husband's rights over the real and personal property of his wife and her disabilities, quote, in law, he was technically correct within fixed limits. On its face,
Yep.
the statement meant that in case of litigation, the husband asserts certain rights over the real and property of his wife, and if the wife contests them or the said rights are otherwise drawn in question in common law, the common law courts will enforce the husband's common law rights unless the husband and wife have made agreements to the contrary before and after the marriage, or the father or other friend or relative of the wife. So there's a whole set of people, not just she passes this property from father to husband so the father can do this. She can do it, another relative can do it, a friend of the family can do it, has safeguarded the wife's rights by the creation of a trust or otherwise, which agreements and trusts made in due form are valid in equity and will be enforced by courts of equity, which, as we just pointed out, supersede common law. So in other words, in the absence of valid agreements and actions to the contrary, the default basically, if the couple isn't doing something else, or if the wife hasn't made under other arrangements, if he so desires, his creditors or other litigants may assert a husband's wife over the wife's property, a husband's right over the wife's property, within the limits set by specific rules of common law, and common law courts will enforce them in case of litigation. So only if she leaves this completely open for him to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and even like courts of equity would actually they would make exceptions when exceptions were relevant, right? Like, so I read about this one case where this the husband booted the wife out. Okay, she was pregnant and booted her out, right? And he wanted to keep all the property, and included in the property was the layette, right? Which is all of the linens and supplies that you would need to take care of an infant, right? And he wanted to keep those, and the court said no, right? It doesn't even matter that you had just cause to boot her out, because I think she cheated on him or something, right? And so he had cause to separate, cause to boot her out of the house, right? And not take responsibility for her. But like, what use do you have for these linens, right? She's having the milkman's child, right? She can take them, and when the baby doesn't need them anymore, she'll return them.
So you want to listen to more of the video?
Yeah.
Not really, but yes. We probably should.
All right.
Yeah, but anyway, so that's the long discussion on why we can't trust Blackwell. Although I will add that he's misrepresenting Blackwell. So not only Blackstone, yes.
Yeah.
There's a Maxwell in all of this. That's why I keep making that mistake. Blackstone. He's actually misrepresenting Blackstone, which himself misrepresented the law. So we're several misrepresentations deep into this.
There
Okay.
you go. All right, so we're going to talk about laws concerning women, which I guess he is showing as itself being an absurd thing. Like, how, look at this, is already sexist. How could there be laws concerning women? It's almost like they're a special class of person. All right, let's play it.
Feminist and women's rights activist of the 19th century, wrote a brief summary in plain language of the laws of England concerning women in 1856, describing the impact of coverture in great detail. A man and wife are one person in law. The wife loses all her rights as a single woman, and her existence is entirely absorbed into that of her husband. He is civilly responsible for her acts, and she lives under his protection or cover, and her condition is called coverture. What was her personal property before marriage, such as money in hand, money at the bank, jewelry, household goods, clothes, becomes absolutely her husband's, and he may assign or dispose of them at his pleasure, whether he and his wife live together or not. Money earned by a married woman belongs absolutely to her husband. A married woman cannot sue or be sued for contracts, nor can she enter into contracts except as the agent of her husband. If she
Okay,
If
so
you guys wanna
everything
say
that he's
anything
just
to
said
that?
there, yeah, all the stuff that we just pointed out kind of discredits everything you just said there. We just pointed out that not only could women make arrangements within their marriage that made that untrue, that a woman has to agree to that when getting married. If she and her husband have decided that that should be the case, but also, it's possible for her family members, especially with things with regard to property that she's bringing from her father's family, and like an inheritance or a dowry that she's bringing. It's something that can be protected, and she may not even have to make that stipulation. He might. So we've already kind of addressed all of that, and he's wrong on all of it. He's stating partial truths and leaving out parts of the story that determine that is not actually something that women couldn't avoid.
All right. I'm gonna play some more. Here we go.
unites herself to a man, the law immediately steps in, and she finds herself legislated for, and her condition of life suddenly and entirely changed. Whatever age she may be of, she is again considered as an infant. She is again
Oh my
under
God.
reasonable
All those
restraint.
marriage ambushes, just coming out of nowhere, just jumping on a woman. Like, first of all,
she's not considered an infant, right? She's considered the assistant to the CEO of the business operation,
of maintaining her lifestyle.
Yeah, like that's what she is. And okay, there were probably a lot of unhappy marriages, right? Like when you look at sort of the exchange that's going on here, which is like, okay, he's responsible financially to manage the entire financial operation, the corporation that is the marriage, right? And the family, right? He's responsible for that. And she's responsible for giving him kids, right? And I suppose there are a lot of people who got the shaft, right? Like the men whose wives turned out to be barren, and the women whose husbands turned out to be fiscally irresponsible and wastrels. Okay,
and
like
ended up
that's
in jail because of it. Like, that's the problem. Like, if your husband was incapable of paying your debts, he went to jail. So it seems like a problem that solved itself in some ways.
Yeah, but like if you're incapable of giving him children, I mean, like unless you're married to Henry VIII, you probably don't have a whole lot of worries there.
No, and you don't, like, honestly, he's citing this is a political opinion piece that he's citing.
Yeah.
Right? This is somebody's a highly biased reading of the law.
It might as well be a Guardian article.
Yeah. He's basically citing a Guardian article from
he's citing basically the equivalent of the Guardian article whose headline was the anguish of being a 50-50 mom. Oh, so you have to share custody 50-50? And that's anguish, and we should feel sorry for you that you didn't get the whole fucking thing? Yeah, you have to let the kids be with dad 40 to 50% of the time, and we're supposed to feel sorry for you. Not sorry for all the dads who get the kids 0% of the time or every other weekend. No, we have to feel sorry for you because you got shafted by this unfair law of equal parenting.
Yeah. And again, if you read through this, This is the part where they turn on the opinion piece. This is what he's citing. This is remarks. You know what remarks means? I have an opinion. Okay? He's
Okay,
citing
Karen.
someone's opinion. And that opinion is an extremely biased screed about how the law harms women. And maybe there's some truth to it. However, the assumption that men did this intentionally is wrong.
Well,
Right?
they did it intentionally. Yeah, but not intentionally to harm women.
No, but it's like this. I've read the remarks. Okay. I don't know if you guys read it. She's upset that the law isn't accommodating something that is completely a new circumstance, which is women earning their own money in the outside world.
Yeah.
Well, which is women, upper class women earning their own money.
Yeah. Well,
because lower class women did do that, but they did it because their families would starve if they didn't.
Yes.
Yeah.
So she's talking about, women who are earning money over and above their immediate needs, right? And men in these families have control over that money, right? Supposedly, except for the guy who ended up in jail because he couldn't pay his wife's taxes, right? That's the allegation.
Well, that was after.
Okay. Yeah. So she's saying that women need to be able to control their income, right? Okay, fair enough. But this only became an issue once they were able to go out into the workplace because the public life was safe enough, comfortable enough, had indoor plumbing, which is a huge issue. Like everybody listening to this, women were restricted to the home because they had nowhere to piss. Like this was a huge issue. Once they had indoor plumbing, lighting, the public life was comfortable. Women could have jobs because they could go to the bathroom at their jobs, right? Then the issue became that women were bringing in their own money. But the old laws said that men had control over that because men were responsible for the necessities. Under the assumption is that the men were the ones bringing in the money. So the old laws didn't apply properly. So she's saying men did this too. No, the law just didn't keep up with current circumstance, right? That's it. So it needed to be changed. And it was. Except when it was changed in a way that was completely oblivious to the situation for men, leading to that guy dying after going to jail because he couldn't pay for his wife's taxes. Like, all right. And this dude right here sitting and looking at me with the most contemptuously patronizing face I've ever seen. Could your forehead wrinkle with any more concerned wrinkles there? Like, has no willingness to look at the entire picture of this. He is basically citing an opinion piece by someone who literally, manifestly did not look at the situation for men because her advocacy led to a guy dying dying after getting out of a debtor's prison. No doubt didn't do wonders for his health, right? So her advocacy, this document, literally leads to the situation being so bad for men because nobody stopped and said, "Hey, wait, what about the situation for men?" No, they just listened to this.
If we poke this bit over here, what's going to happen over there?
Yeah. No, they just listened to this opinion piece by a feminist who framed the entire thing as oppression of women. They
arbitrary and
we got to change the law to protect the women. They changed it. And they constructed a situation where this Elizabeth, I think it was, could send her husband to jail for not paying her taxes.
Yeah, no, it's like the argument from feminists is that this was all completely arbitrary and malicious.
Yes.
Okay? It wasn't necessary, right? Therefore, it had to be malicious, right? It didn't benefit women in any way whatsoever. Therefore, it only privileged men. Therefore, it had to have been malicious, right? On the part of the men who made the laws, right? And no, that's never been the case. That has never been the case in any society on the planet.
Because that was the framing, the lawmakers went into this based on these women's advocacy. They went into the law. They did not consider the situation for men. They changed it to benefit women without considering the responsibilities placed on men. And they constructed a situation where a very ill man had to go to jail for his wife's death and subsequently died. That's what happened. So he is citing a document which is actually, in the context, the entire context, proving the exact opposite of what he's saying. This issue was not made by men. Men didn't go out and say, we want to punish, we want to restrict women, we want to take their money. They didn't
arbitrarily
they
treat
didn't
them like dirt.
We don't know. This was a situation where the law didn't apply to current circumstance because current circumstance had changed. Feminists said, oh, that's actually men's cruelty to women. Lawmakers went in under that impression, changed the law without considering its effect on men. Right?
Yep.
So this entire thing, including the document he's citing, in its context, proves exactly the opposite of what he's saying. Congratulations, expatriate. Expatriarch. You have just disproven yourself. You've deboonked yourself by citing this document without understanding the historical or legal context of it.
He actually is a matriarchal, patriarchy loving womanist. So I did a song about this a few years ago when I could sing better. Not well, but better than I can sing now. And I still stand by it. Like, feminist men who do this love the concept of patriarchy because it gives them a reason to browbeat other men. If it's real and true, it gives them something to beat other men over the head with, and
feel special.
To feel special, and also feel like women owe them some sort of gratitude for what they're doing because they're somehow helping to rescue women from the evil patriarchy. And that's your matriarchal, patriarchy loving womanist.
Could you imagine people in like 23, 25 looking back at Guardian articles and saying, oh, they oppressed their women so badly?
Yeah, I know.
Could you believe that they allowed them to do gangbangs? Oh my God, that was such oppression of women. Such oppression of women. They didn't even let them have I don't know what. They didn't let them have what are those things called? Bank accounts. They didn't let them have bank accounts in 2025. Didn't you know that, Karen? We're living in the age of horrible women's oppression. Literally. If you looked at in a century, if they look back at Guardian articles, they'll think that we whip our women and grape them in the streets. Like,
yeah.
This is what he's doing. He's looking back at a Guardian article written by a feminist lawyer who not only got what she wanted, but basically made a gigantic hole in the law that hit men really hard.
Yeah.
What feminist lawyer in the late 1800s? How is it possible that men allowed that?
Yeah.
All right, should we play more of the video?
I don't know. She might not have been a lawyer. I might be exaggerating it.
Well, there were lawyers at that time.
Yeah, there were female lawyers, doctors, journalists. Like, they existed. So
did you know? I went to Rome and I found out that 30% of the brick foundries in Rome were owned by women. And like brick foundries were like one of the biggest industries. Yeah. And that was a male, like that brick foundry was generally considered a male industry. So 30% of the brick foundries being owned by women, you have to wonder how many of the breweries, the butchers, the tailories, the tanners, the bakeries were owned by women.
Yeah, no. It's like you look at there were two ways, for at least in England, for women to become master tradesmen, right? And one was to learn the trade from their husband, and then he dies, and then she just takes over the business. There were a lot of butchers and blacksmiths and stuff like that, women who they didn't maybe do it themselves, right? But they were able to take on journeymen and apprentices, right? And run the business that way and have it be solely owned, right? Same with butchers and stuff like that, right? But most of the women who got into the trades, because Webster, Baxter, and Brewster. Stir is the female suffix of a surname, right? Weaver. These are the female counterparts of Weaver, Baker, and Brewer. Okay. And they dominated those trades because they were generally a lot less hot and sweaty and all of the rest. And they were a way to apply a skill, like a learned skill, right? And those women were predominantly orphans, who came out of orphanages at age 12 or 13. And wanted an opportunity because they didn't have marriage prospects at all. They wanted an opportunity to learn how to do a skilled trade and support themselves throughout their lives. And brewing, baking, and weaving are things that you don't have to travel for. Like, there's a reason it's called journeyman, right? Is because they would go from town to town, right, on not always safe roads, right, for years before they managed to acquire master status and then set up shop somewhere, put down roots somewhere,
Very
set up a
unsafe
shop.
roads.
Right, very unsafe roads, right? But the brewing and weaving and baking industries, right? Those were things that were a lot more settled in one place, and you didn't have to travel, right? You didn't have traveling bakers going from town to town or traveling weavers going from town to town, right? So you'd make your product in one spot, and then you would send the men out to take it from town to town to sell it or whatever, right? And and they dominated those trades, which were fairly same with things like goldsmiths and silversmiths and things like that. There were women all over the trades. Being a goldsmith or a silversmith didn't involve a lot of like banging a giant hammer on an anvil all day, right? And
you'll see it over and over again. Those
Yeah.
trades that women could reasonably do with their physical abilities, they did. You also see it in lace making and something that was incredibly lucrative, which was silk spinning.
Yes, and like you look at being what are they called, farriers, right? You're gonna get kicked in the head by a horse.
Yeah,
right. No, so women didn't really do that. Coopers, women didn't really do that because you're using these big, long freaking knives, and you're banging the metal rings to make the big barrels and stuff, right? And to shape the staves and make the barrels, right? They weren't really involved in that so much, right? And those kinds of trades very much, right? But you had female apothecaries and like all kinds of those things from the 1400s and earlier in the UK, right?
There were women who were physicians in like the 11th century.
Yeah, or earlier, right? Like earlier, like you're talking, you're talking about female physicians, in ancient Rome, ancient Greece.
All right. I sense that Brian wishes to move on. Okay.
I'm sorry that I even made that joke, but let's play some more of his video here. This is still talking about coverture laws, and I think that a lot of it has been addressed, but we'll listen to it a little bit more. Coverture and its implications, and then there's the evolution of women's rights, which is a little bit later.
Let's hear this opinion on the Guardian piece from 1850 by the feminist lawyer.
That is brought up as evidence.
She loses her separate existence and is merged into that of her husband. She is
and he into her.
And can hold.
Well, I was gonna say it goes both ways, like literally two bodies, one flesh. That's the purpose of marriage, as a religious sacrament. So, but I mean, we're not. I know we're not here to talk about that, but that is an aspect that you have to understand. Like in these years, almost everyone that was making these laws were Christian, so that was like everyone was on the same page, basically. Like women too. This wasn't like a thing where,
actually,
yeah, go ahead.
Blackstone cites pagan law, which was not fun. It was very draconian in some ways for women. But everybody, like Brian was saying, everybody's on the page that marriage makes men and women into one flesh, right?
Yeah.
And
so it's not just women that lose their personhood. Men do too, in a
But I
way.
just
I mean,
wanna
if that's
remind
how you're going to
everyone-
frame it.
I just want to remind everyone this is the 1850s equivalent of a Guardian article, right?
Yes.
She might be a feminist lawyer. She might have a legal, status background, but this is still her opinion on the law, right? This is her opinion on the law. That's what we are reading right now. Okay, so, and this is his opinion on a feminist lawyer's opinion in 1850 on the law, or suffragists. Okay, continue.
Yep. I got a Rumble rant. So NovaFan21 gave us a Rumble rant. Thank you. And for $1 and says, honestly, the more and more about how women were treated in what they call patriarchy, I end up liking it more and more. Can Vertical Chat tell me more about how to create that society? Thank you, NovaFan21. If you're not on Rumble, you should follow us on Rumble. It is growing fast. It's a great platform. But anyway, all right. So let us continue this video.
Nothing of herself. She has no legal right to any property. Not even her clothes, books, or household goods are her own. And any money she earns can be robbed from her legally by her husband. This covering also extended to children in the marriage. The legal custody of children belongs.
Again, the thrust of this article is the change from women not earning income to women earning income. Although women did earn income, actually probably the real thrust is that rich women are now earning income in jobs that they enjoy.
Substantial income.
Income. Okay, so the whole issue for this article, and it's an article, it's not law. He's not citing a first source. He's citing someone's opinion. Is that rich women now can earn income, and this individual is upset that men control it, right? Even though she still has a husband who's obligated to her upkeep and her debts. Now that the circumstances has changed and rich women earn income, now we got to deal with it, right? And we have to deal with it in the most bad faith way possible. Not a recognition that the law is the way it is because of a circumstance that's no longer in play. No, it has to be because men deliberately went out and harmed women.
Yeah,
and again, he is ignoring the fact that women could choose to not allow their husbands to control their property.
Yes. Well,
and women could earn money. Middle or upper class women could earn money before that. It's just that it became a more common choice.
Yes,
over time.
And that's what this article is about. That's what this article is addressing. And the thing is that when they're in the marriage and they're earning money, apparently the man could steal it all from them. Although that's interesting because
even though he's legally obligated to use it to support her.
Yeah, and pay for her taxes, right? So again, this is an opinion piece on the law, and it's an opinion piece about something that's changing, right? So this is like, if we step back a generation back, women aren't writing these opinion pieces because this situation is not a problem for them. They don't have their own, they don't have significant income that they're rich women don't have significant income that they're bringing into the family, right? That they want,
or if they do, their fathers did a carve out in the marriage contract to protect that and keep it for her,
or anybody else in their family did that, right? But he's completely misrepresenting the situation. It only applies to women's income. Doesn't apply to the property, as we have discussed at length. There were plenty of ways for women to control their property, and even in Blackstone, which he cites but then never seems to reference, women had control over property because, and I know they did, because Blackstone explicitly says that women couldn't give their husbands their property that they had control over without a third party making sure that they didn't do it under duress.
Yeah.
So why would you have that in law if women couldn't control their own property, right? They had their own property. They would separate it out legally prior to marriage. And then if the husband was like, I want that property, they would have to go to the wife take her away from her husband and discuss it with her without his input to make sure she was
Yeah.
doing under her own violation. So even though, you know, he's citing Blackstone, who himself there's plenty of criticism of, he isn't even freaking honestly citing Blackstone.
Yeah.
He's ignoring humongous parts of Blackstone. Like I gave Brian a document that's Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England. We could go to that passage and show everyone that women had the ability to control their own property in marriage. They just didn't have the ability to control the marital property.
Yeah.
Well, and they didn't have the ability to agree that their husbands can have control over their property and then take it back later without cause.
Yeah. Okay.
So
And we-
basically,
All right,
women had to keep their word. Women
Oh,
most
no.
affected.
let's jump ahead to the bit about
Oh wait, but
women's
I want to
rights.
do. I
Oh,
want
you
to
wanted
do
to say
what,
something?
what's on
Go.
what's on the screen.
Yeah.
The legal custody of children belongs to the father. Yeah, because he paid for them. Because he was the sole person legally bound, legally obligated to pay for them. Right? The mother, unless she was single, if she was married, right, and she abandoned the family, she fucked off, right? She didn't get to take the kids because she wasn't obligated to pay for them, right? So if she took the kids, then all of a sudden, if she gets custody, legal custody of the kids, then all of a sudden her children's house, the children of the marriage's household is now her household, and her ex has to pay for everything. So she can just leave on a whim, right? Take the kids with her, and he's still on the fucking hook for the entire bill. And for some strange reason, people back then didn't think that was fair. So the person who paid for the kids was the person whose household the kids were raised in.
It also helped to prevent women with
being
children
stupid and cunty and leaving their husbands for
from
no good
becoming
reason.
burdens on the state.
Language.
Yeah, it also helped to prevent women from making themselves and their children burdens on the state. After the dissolution of the monasteries, when the church became less responsible for what we would today call welfare, and the state pretty much became the only place to get what we would today call welfare, the state created a bunch of
Pittance
laws.
for the
The
poor,
king,
yeah.
like the crown, I shouldn't say the king because the poor laws were from Queen Elizabeth, but the crown had to deal with the fact that people would, if they had the opportunity, and women in particular, simply rely on state coffers rather than their own ingenuity and their own capability to work and so on. And so,
Or get married.
Yeah, or get married. So
stay married.
there were a bunch of laws that had to be passed during that time period. And if you actually go back and you connect the dots between those laws, the poor laws, and the way that custody was handled, you realize that everybody that's familiar with welfare reform from the year 2000 should be also familiar with the English poor laws, and you should get a sense of deja vu when you compare the two. All of that stuff was tried before and failed. And the only real way to prevent women and children, or women with children, from making themselves and their children wards of the state is to hold them accountable for breaking their agreements with their husbands when they abandon marriage, and to prefer paternal custody as opposed to maternal custody, or equally shared parenting, such that women are responsible, and they are as responsible as the man for supporting the children, or they are responsible for maintaining the marriage.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm going to play the next bit. I mean, because he was just going to talk about the children, but you guys just addressed that. So let's just jump ahead. About here, I think. Okay.
the wife's personal property. The wife argued that since Texas was still covered by coverture laws, and she was prevented from entering into legal contracts as her own legal entity, the government had no right to seize her personal property to cover her husband's debts. And the Supreme Court agreed, though in his dissent, Justice Black wrote, "The Texas law of coverture, which was adopted by its judges and the state legislature has now largely abandoned, rests on the old common law fiction that the husband and wife are one. This rule has worked out in reality to mean though the husband and wife are one, the one is the husband. This fiction rested on what I had supposed is today a completely discredited notion, that a married woman, being a female, is without the capacity to make her own contracts and do her own business." And yet, while claiming that coverture was largely abandoned, the court also recognized that 10 states, Alabama, Arizona, California, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, and Texas all had coverture laws that limited the capacity of married women to conduct legal contracts to some degree. It's also
Yeah, they limited the capacity of married women to conduct legal contracts in which they were disposing of their property with their husbands. Like,
Isn't it funny how he gets very specific when he's trying to like make arguments in favor of his bias, but when he clearly like when things are a little bit muddier, he just says to some degree. He uses equivocative statements, right, that are kind of vague, because then nobody's going to look into it. It's be like, oh, they're limited to some degree. That basically means completely without looking into it, which most people are not going to do.
Well, and half of what he said here is stuff that we've discredited. Yeah, half the stuff that we've said, or he said here, is stuff that we've already discredited. But it's interesting that he points out that at that point there were only 10 states that still had any kind of coverture laws, and there were only some limitations in regard to those coverture laws. And what he is citing is essentially a woman cannot run up debt in her husband's name without her husband's consent. That remained for years, and feminists fought to get rid of that so that a woman could run up debt in her husband's name without her husband's consent. And a woman today can do that. And I have seen men financially devastated by that condition, where women have run up debt in their name, and it goes both ways. A man can in a marriage run up debt in both of their names, and then the wife goes to leave and she discovers that there's all this debt she didn't know about. And so it's a bad thing for both parties.
50-50. It's 50-50. It's like it's the marital property and the marital debt.
Yep.
You know, and here in Alberta, and I don't know whether they got rid of it yet. But when we were buying this house, right, we were buying it from my mother-in-law, and we had all the paperwork, the mortgage was approved and everything was like ready to go. And she went to her lawyer and he was like, wait a minute, you mean, I thought John was dead. I thought he was deceased. This changes everything. Right? Well, John was in a long-term care facility for people with dementia and Alzheimer's, and he was non-compos mentis, and but he was still alive. And at some point in the 1950s or something in Alberta, our coverture law regarding dower rights, had been updated to be gender neutral, right? So it used to be that a man couldn't sell his solely owned property if the wife had a life interest in it, if she had an interest in living there, right? He could not sell it without her signing off on it, right? And then they made it gender neutral. No spouse can sell their solely held property without the other spouse's consent, right? And so my mother-in-law was like, what the hell? So I can't sell my own house. This is my own house. I bought this house. It's in my name only, right? And I can't sell it? You're telling me I can't sell it without his signature, but he's non-compos. He's been declared non-compos mentis, right? I have power of attorney over him. I should be able to sign off on it. And he's like, no, that's not good enough. You have to actually go to court and apply for guardianship. over him in order to be able to sign off on his behalf, right? So it was like a big fucking fiasco, right? All based on laws that were designed to protect women from selling their homes out from under them, like absconding with the secretary
It's really
and
interesting
selling the house out from under
because
her.
there are
right?
comments under this video that say that their mother or their grandmother had her house sold out from under her. And I was like, wait, what about dower laws? Which would have
Yeah, dower
prevented that?
rights.
And different
Dower rights.
different rights occurred in different countries, and there were
Yeah, and in different
remedies that
states and
took time in
Yep.
the United States. But I don't
but you know, but
I don't
dower
think that
rights
that
have
was
existed. Dower rights have existed for as long as Coverture has
right.
existed, right? You know, and there
they
And
are
I
they-
don't think that was an easy thing to do in the United States, even when
No,
it was
it
a
wasn't.
possibility. It was something that you would have to there'd have to be a bunch of legal maneuvering taking place. Now, my family history
in
has
Michigan,
some
it was still a gendered law
right.
until
My
like
family history has some of
2017.
that. Right. My on my dad's side of the family, his parents were divorced, and his father came from a divorce before marrying his mother. So it was there were property things that I learned about in regard to that over time women did gain more control over property because of the issues of divorce. But those circumstances were actually much more rare than feminists make them out to be. And it did take a lot of clever maneuvering on a man's part. It wasn't just some straightforward, well, he can sell the house out from under her and there's nothing
No.
she can do about it. Women still had recourse in divorce cases. There was alimony, there was child support, and it was based on income and based on expenses. And there was fault divorce. It wasn't called that, but basically, if the husband cheated and then left, the court punished him for it financially. If
Yeah, but if the wife cheated,
if the wife cheated and left, the court didn't always punish her financially. They might punish her in terms of deeming her
Not-
unfit as a mother, and so she couldn't get
not
custody.
not awarding her alimony.
Yeah, not awarding
Right.
her as much alimony. And of course, if she remarried after the marriage was over, alimony would end, right? And
Yeah.
so there were things. There was more accountability in terms of getting divorced during that time period. So I have my doubts that a woman was in a situation where a man was just able to sell the house out from under her during a divorce, or
Especially if she'd lived in it for any
especially
period
if
of
she'd
time.
lived in it for any period of time.
Can
It
I-
just seems like there had to be some other factors going on there that aren't being mentioned here.
Can I just point something out? The way that he discusses the states that still had coverture laws
Mm-hmm.
suggests that there's some kind of horrible conspiracy, when in fact it's just like, as I said, the persistence of law. British common law, the states adopted a lot of British common law. So it probably was a situation where you had a blank slate, you grabbed some law from somewhere, right? And then if it didn't apply, then you worked with it to make it work with your situation, right? So they just grabbed British law and saw if it applied for their situation, and then changed things, which is what they did. The law didn't work for American women, they changed it. And he's constructing this narrative like the fact that they didn't just invent law whole cloth out of women's needs from day one is oppression of women. It isn't.
And
Law
it's
is a
funny
very
because
conservative institution.
the evolution of how law was created all ran along lines of male obligation, right? From back in the King John days, where the barons actually had to go to war with the king in order to enforce the right of at least the people who were financing the king's wars to have a say in the king's lawmaking. And then this had to be done again when his son.
Financing and prosecuting, because they were
financing and prosecuting. They all had to fight, or they had to send their own mercenaries, their own subjects, and so the whole parliamentary system evolved out of Common Council. I think it was called Common Council. I always want to call it Great Council, but I believe it was Common Council. And that right was established long before him, and he disrespected it. He chose to ignore it, and that's what the First Baron War came out of, what the original iteration of the Magna Carta came out of, what the entire parliamentary system came out of, and what all of English common law after that evolved out of. Then there had to be a second Baron's War against his son for the same reasons, pretty much, that the king was ignoring the council and basically saying, no, I'm going to spend your money and I'm not going to talk to you about how I'm doing it. Get me your fighters. We're going to do these violent conflicts after I've made all these bad decisions. And the people finally turned around and said, fuck you, no.
Yeah, the men.
Yeah.
This was one of those moments. So when women say, we didn't get primary consideration in this, it's because women were not involved. Women didn't have to fund the king's wars. Women didn't have to fight in the king's wars. Women still had voting rights. Women still had some determination as to who got onto that council. And when it evolved into Parliament with a House of Commons and a House of Lords, as long as women met the economic conditions to vote, they had voting rights.
Wow. Which is really funny because that whole system evolved out of the system of defending borders in order to, stop wholesale invasion and destruction of the civilians, right?
Yeah. Voting rights have never not been for men tied to the condition that men defend the country.
Protect the state that gives them those rights.
Right.
And that's, I think there's absolutely no getting around that. And it really hit home when I was researching an argument that feminists made about Black men's suffrage. And they were, because I was pointing out that suffrage has been tied to service in wartime. And they said they pointed out the whole situation of, and I actually looked up the arguments made by Black men for their suffrage. And right in like the first paragraph, it's like, we fought a war to defend and preserve the state. So we have done our duty, and now we, humbly present the case to be given suffrage. And that's another difference.
You can find it all over, the universal suffrage in the UK, right? All over the debates, Hansard, I believe it is, the archive. All of the parliamentary debates. The thing that really came out was, if he's fit to fight, he's fit to vote, and that there are no classes in a foxhole. That all men earned this right. And then you look at how they implemented suffrage. They implemented it for all men 21 and over and all women 35 and over, right? And that was because they did not, so many men had died in World War I that they did not want to create a supermajority voting bloc made up solely of women. So the 21-year-old women had to wait for a while before they got their vote, right? Until the population of males had somewhat recovered. In Canada, you look at the first women to be given suffrage, right? The first women were something like 2,000 military nurses in World War I, who were simultaneously with men who served, given the vote at age 18, which is the age at which you are legally allowed or required to serve. And in conjunction with their conscription legislation that called 18-year-olds to serve, they gave 18-year-old men, male conscripts and service members, all of them, and any female service members who were currently serving, right, gave them the vote at age 18. Good job, Canada, right? Because if you're fit to serve, then you're fit to vote.
Yeah, it's
right?
all been tied.
even the taxation standards and property ownership standards that affected who could vote prior to universal suffrage were tied into military service. The prototype for taxation was barons funding the king's ability to get mercenaries from his area if they were a distance away and couldn't get knights to him in order to fight his battles.
From my
And you
reading,
look
my
at the evolution of suffrage in the UK too. I think it was after 1860, there were a lot of men who were on the voter rolls who did not qualify to vote, right? I think at that point it was about 60% of men were allowed to vote who didn't technically qualify. Well, why didn't they technically qualify? Because they didn't own land, they didn't own property, like real property, non-movable property, but they rented, and their landlord said, well, if you want to, you can pay my property tax in your name and cheat the system and get the vote.
But from my reading, just to get back to the system like that led to the Magna Carta, prior to being able to buy their way out of service, barons, or I think they were like jarls at the time or something, but they would have to jarls. They would have to actually serve. So that it started where you'd have a king, his bondsmen would be obligated to serve in his wars. And then it evolved to, if they could pay their way out of that, then they could not do this. So that's where the taxes come in, is paying your way out of having to serve in war. But this is the thing, like the whole edifice, like all of the state that we understand it to be in the past could be seen more as a simple utility of defending the borders. And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
There's just it. And the thing is that we look at the past and we say, well, women didn't have a say in it. Well, women don't really have a say in water, like the sewer system utility. They don't really.
But they did. They
Well,
did have a say in it.
But
this is the thing that people don't realize. From the moment,
for the sake of argument, is what I'm getting at. For the sake of argument, even if women had absolutely no say in it, if you look at utilities today that are majority built, maintained, and run by men, women don't have much say in the operation of those either, right? And you're right, women did have a say in it. They had a say absolutely disproportionate to their actual maintenance of the system and sacrifice in the system, because it was always on men. But even if they didn't, the fact is that men were the ones running the utility, the ones building the utility, the ones manning the utility, the ones sacrificing for the utility. Of course, they had the greatest say in it. Like, it's just like men are the ones doing the work, building the sewers. They have the most say in where the sewers go, how they're operated, how they're manned. It's exactly the same. In that fabled 2325, we'll look back and say, well, women didn't have equal vote in the running of the sewers and the electrical companies and it's like, well, yes, of course they didn't. They weren't doing the work. Of course, women didn't have the vote when the state was simply a utility defending the borders. They didn't do the work.
They did. They did have the vote. They just had to meet the same conditions as the men. And then on top of that, in addition to being able to vote if they met the same financial conditions as the men, you didn't go into a little booth with a little shield that kept everybody from seeing how you voted when voting started in medieval times. And this continued right up until, I think, we talked about this, like I keep saying, we talked about this on HBR Talk. I did a whole long series bringing this in to my co-hosts on HBR Talk and letting them see it and talking about it. I'm in the process of creating a timeline that I'll make public when I get it done. I have to pay to make it public, so I don't want to keep paying for it over and over again. But in any case, as voting evolved, it went through several iterations of you vote in public and everybody, men, women, children, people from other communities, if they come on voting day, they can see how you vote and they can respond later to how you voted. So if you vote for something if you vote to send a particular person to Parliament or to Great Council, or Common Council, and that person's actions turn out to be not beneficial to the community, or just the women don't like it, they come back to you later. Well, you voted for this, and we're going to hold it against you. And here's the ways that we're going to hold it against you. There's no privacy. There's no secret vote. There's none of that. Until after the United States is formed and after it changes in the United States.
And then it changes everywhere else. And the way that I described this with leftists, no, like this is really funny. The way that and it might be, you might find it insulting. The way I've described it to people on the left is imagine a American, like the running between Kamala Harris and Trump, and everybody had to vote for Trump publicly. Imagine how that would have distorted everything.
Oh yeah, no, and if you look at it, like that was one of the arguments against women's suffrage, because and you look at, they're still playing the same card now, right? If you give women the vote, you'll only be giving husbands 2 votes, okay? And then Kamala Harris comes out with a campaign ad where reassuring women that your husband doesn't need to know who you voted for in the privacy of the voting booth. You can lie to him and say you voted for Trump when you really voted for Kamala Harris. And the 2 women look over the voting box thing, right? And their eyes meet and they wink at each other and they both mark their X for Kamala Harris because their husbands don't need to know, right? Okay,
what a bunch of forward valor.
I know, but we're literally using the same kind of arguments, right, that were used against giving women the suffrage in the late 1800s or early 1900s. Well, there's no secret ballot, so the husband will know how the wife votes. So she'll vote according to what her husband wants. Otherwise, he'll beat her when they get home. Okay, so we're still using the same fucked up psychology.
Are you fucking kidding me? Women will vote according to their husbands. No, you mean husbands will vote according to their wives.
I know, that's why they wasted all that paper and ink on posters saying, ladies, tell your wives to vote this way or that way, right?
Tell your husbands.
Back in the early 1900s, right? Like paper and ink wasn't cheap back then, right? Yeah, they wouldn't have wasted that money if it wasn't effective.
Can I just respond to that? That Kamala Harris ad. What the hell are you even like? This is not how normal relationships work, right? As far as I can tell, it's not the woman hiding shit from her husband. It's usually the husband hiding stuff from the woman, and it's usually
because he doesn't want to be browbeaten.
Yeah, like taking a nap in his car on the way home from work, getting an extra round of Helldivers in secretively behind her back, being able to pursue his own interests without her oversight or nagging. Like this is the problem with this is that control freakery, according to the CDC, the Center of Disease Control, is more of a female activity. It's a female dominated activity. More women engage in controlling abuse than men. Yep. So anyway, that's why I said it was stolen valor.
Well, it's not just according to the CDC. It's according to pretty much everything. The PASC, Partner Abuse State of Knowledge Project. It's the case according to Marie Strauss. It's the case according to like all these other domestic violence researchers out there, right? Like control and coercion, monitoring, excessive monitoring, stalkerish behavior, snooping in his personal devices and his computer, and like checking to his internet search history and things like that, right? That's all a female thing. Like it's not all a female thing, but it's predominantly female, right? Wanting to control his behavior in public, refusing to let him wear what he wants to an event, right? Like all kinds of shit like that. yeah, no, that's extremely female dominated. So most men are just like, you know,
You don't care. There's not that
Yeah.
important to them. I just want to say
No.
this is completely catty and petty, and might indicate that we're sort of getting into the weeds. But those goddamn condescension wrinkles are really pissing me off.
Okay, yeah, I know. You have a thing
This is
with
like
physical.
the Hannah
You
Cox mouth, and then
Can't
the,
really
the
get away with
forehead.
that.
Yeah, the
forehead
Or away
wrinkles.
from that, I should say.
The Sachi cool mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
Could you
thing that's
be any
pretty
more
much
contemptuous?
it's common. I've noticed to feminists in general when they do this stuff. It's like
By the way, guys,
they
this
can't help
guy,
it.
this guy's not a feminist.
Yes, he is.
I know he is. But according to his own, he will probably, if he responds to this, he's gonna point out that he's not, or at least not in the way that people typically refer to them.
He's just drank all
Uh-huh.
the Kool-Aid, but he says
is-
it's lime flavored,
Yeah,
not
look,
cherry.
on his
if
channel,
I go to,
let me just on his channel, it just is his about section says here to talk about masculinity, patriarchy, feminism, and how to avoid the toxic antisocial behaviors that are harming men. And he talks about he has videos like that are supposedly in support of men, but his resources or his sources are people like Michael Kimmel. So
if all of your
God!
sources are
Jesus Christ!
feminist,
just
like
take
Michael
it.
Kimmel, by the
as-
way, is an
yeah.
idiot. But if all your sources are feminist, is if I take everything I say, all right, from the New Testament of the Bible, and my education comes from going to church every Sunday, and everything I say in the name of Jesus Christ, and then I turn around and say, but I'm not a Christian.
Yeah,
Is
no,
anybody going to
totally not.
believe me? Is
Yeah.
a single person out there going to be, okay, well, she says she's not a Christian, but everything she says is based on this religious belief? Sorry, but no. And that colors how it applies to everyone else's life circumstances and whether or not there are alternative perspectives, and whether or not I have accessed and based my thoughts and opinions on all of the available information or only some of it. There are some things that religion can solve, and there are some things that religion can help you solve, but not by itself. And then there are some things that are not addressed by religion. And his belief in all of this feminist ideology is a religious belief. I know a lot of people don't like to consider feminism to be the same as a religion. I would equate it more in terms of a cult than an actual religion, because it's not functional the way religion can be. But
Paul Nathanson has an interesting interview out right now. I'll send the link to you
yeah,
guys after
it's
the show.
absolutely feminism.
Okay.
Patriarchy theory equates men to both God and the devil. And
Yes.
toxic masculinity, so-called toxic masculinity, and so-called misogyny, those are men's original sin. And then at the same time, feminism equates women as the protected human class, not that men are considered to be human. And so everything that he is saying is coming from that perspective. Even if he doesn't want to be called a feminist, you don't get to take everything you say from an ideology and then not claim to be following that ideology. If you are following something else, then that should be evidenced by the fact that everything you say comes from something else, with maybe a few exceptions where that ideology provides information
It's not
that
the
you
name.
can't get elsewhere.
It's not the name, it's the belief systems that they're
Right,
the
it's the belief systems. And to call himself the ex-patriarch, right, that is strictly based on feminism's patriarchy theory, right? There is no outside of feminism equivalent of feminism's patriarchy theory.
There's
which I keep saying theory, it's really not, it's conjecture.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I think there's like definitional context, that you could use in terms of patriarchal societies, blah blah blah. The father is
but
the CEO of the household and
they
things
don't
like that,
really
right? But
match up to what feminism's patriarchy conjecture alleges. Like nothing outside of feminism has that same victim narrative.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like there's patriarchy, and then there's all caps the patriarchy, TM,
Right.
trademark, yeah, and that's what he's going with here.
Okay,
is
can I
the
just get in
patriarchy.
here for a sec? Because I know that in fact, I suspect that his conversation is going to go into a completely different area, which will inspire additional conversation from both Hannah and Karen. So I'm thinking that we can save this for maybe next week. Yes, I got a
maybe
thumbs
2
up
weeks
from
from
Yeah,
Mike.
now.
that sounds good
2 weeks
because
from now,
yeah,
or
it's
Yeah,
gonna.
I might not
it's-
be able next week, but
but we'll put a pin in it. We'll
We'll
figure it out.
yeah.
figure it out. Yeah.
We'll bring
Well,
Hannah
it is
back
11:15, and I haven't had breakfast yet.
Yeah, neither have I. And but you know, like we'll continue this. I just know, knowing Hannah, knowing Karen, knowing the next topic,
Yeah,
that it's another
I
2
did a
hours.
whole video on the next topic, so
So
yeah.
it's another. So let's just let's say this is good, and I just want to I have like stuff I wrote out. I have like 3 pages that I wrote out based on all my comments and talking points that I did in the video itself that I haven't even got to. But hopefully we'll be able to do that next time. But anyway, so I just want to remind everyone that despite the many concerned wrinkles in his brow, he is not actually lecturing to people who are ignorant of the law and history. I mean, he can put even more wrinkles, but it won't change the fact that all 3 of us are very researched in
He
these
can't
topics.
help. He can't help his wrinkles. We shouldn't
Yeah.
shame him for the things that
Well,
are
I mean,
outside of his control.
We're old. We can wrinkle if we just like
Yeah, but
show
if we
the-
have
Speak
like
for yourself, Anna.
But
Yeah,
I,
well,
um,
I've been wrinkled for a
the thing
long
is,
time,
we
so
don't do this in a the expression.
Dude,
I can't even.
if you're talking about the smug, concerned trolling of leftists, tell me about it. I've seen
well,
it
if I
for
use
years.
my
so-
bifocals, I can look smug.
Okay,
See,
let
I'm
me
looking
see
at
if I
you
can
guys
get
like
the-
this right now.
If I can
Yeah,
get
that's
this
pretty
wrinkle
smug.
action going.
Actually, this is the only way I can get stuff on the screen to be in focus.
What's the matter? Don't you read?
Yeah,
Okay, well,
exactly. But
close this
Yes,
out,
that's why I
Allison.
need
Let's-
this
let's-
part of
but
my glasses.
despite all of the wrinkles of smugness, and I'm not trying to shame his wrinkles. I just know why they're there. You know, because there's a lot of contempt towards our ability to read as women. Well, sorry, as non-feminist women, our ability to understand law and history, and also our ability to call out this just imputations of malice where there's no reason to have them. Like the law changes slowly. Circumstances change. Sometimes the law doesn't address the circumstances for women immediately because the law is a conservative institution. You
There's
don't
a
have to
thing
appeal.
called leg.
Yeah, you don't have to appeal to male. Patriarchy is the god of the lag, right? Every time the law lags, that's men hating women. No, it's just
Yeah.
the law being a conservative institution. That's it.
Yeah.
You don't have to read malice into it. And in fact,
And every
it says
time it
a lot
gets
that you
every
do.
time it gets progressive, there's like serious unintended consequences.
Yes. For
It
men.
might just be that government is not the end all be all solution to all things occurring in human civilization. And it
Yeah.
might just be that every time you try to micromanage human relationships, whether it's loving relationships, economic relationships, neighborly relationships, or whatever, you create those unintended consequences and you cause more problems. And then
Yeah.
feminism comes in and looks at that situation and says, men did this on purpose to oppress women.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And that's the thing. We have the research and the knowledge to push back on that. And we did.
Mhm.
And that's where my statement comes from. It's a very challenging statement, but we need the space to talk about feminist patriarchy not being real. Well, first of all,
Yeah.
it's
Because
never
it's
been
not.
proven because it's not. All right. It's just not. And this entire, like, going back to 1850 and finding a Guardian article written by a feminist lawyer about law, you know, like the equivalent, an opinion piece by a feminist lawyer, and then presenting it as fact. All right. No, sir. Don't, no. You don't get to do that. Anyway, so we will continue in the next installment of the Rantzerker. Well, maybe not the next installment, but the installment. We'll work it out. So, but if you enjoy this content and you want to send us a tip, and a comment. You want to attach a comment to the tip. You don't have to have a comment with your tip. You do so at feedthebadger.com/justthetip. It's just a really good way to send us because those things stay in our community and we can ponder them. So feedthebadger.com/justthetip to send us a tip. I do want to do a shout out to Anonymous who put in $2,000 in the fundraiser.
Woo!
I know, like, geez,
What?
thank you, Anonymous.
All right, here we go.
Very much appreciated.
Holy.
Yeah, it's
That's
end of
pretty
year.
awesome.
Yeah, it is. We are very close to our goal. You know, like 300 and 300 and let me just double check here. That actually puts the total from Anonymous at 4,000 for the month.
Oh,
Well,
Jesus.
assuming it's the same anonymous.
Yeah, assuming it's the same Anonymous. We can't assume that.
Yeah.
$385 left for the goal. I'm probably going to do an additional. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do an additional goal above that for the true dope tax that I have to pay. And then once we get that sorted, I want to get a Christmas bonus for Brian. And
Hey, thanks, Allison.
yeah, and
I mean, we'll see if it works out.
Yeah, well, no, it will. It will. I know these guys. They'll pony up for a Christmas bonus for you. And if we can get a Christmas bonus, we'll also try for Hannah as well. But you know, we're gonna do Brian first, then. Oh shit! I just created a hierarchy. I'm really sorry.
Well, actually, I kind of created that hierarchy when I refused to get paid for what I did until after the guys got paid. So
Yeah.
that kind of, because I am not going to leave my primary source of income to do this full time. So that's fair to make me last on the list of people that get paid.
Well, I'm first though.
Yeah.
So there you go. You know, I always felt bad about that, but then I'm like, well, this wouldn't exist if I.
I was
didn't
going to say, we don't want to try doing this without you. So
yeah, nobody wants to be woken up at 12 a.m. by the Canadian Revenue Agency about fucking GST. Oh, good Lord. Anyway, so feedthebadger.com/support if you want to help us out. 385 left to go for this goal. And back to you, Brian, for doing all the things, the remainder of the things.
All right. Yep.
The things that I'm not.
Right. Oh, okay. So if you guys like this video, please hit like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, hit the bell for notifications, leave us a comment, let us know what you guys think about what we discussed on the show today. There's a link to this full-length video that we're responding to in the description, so you can watch it yourself. And please, please, please share this video because sharing is caring. Thank you so much for coming on today's episode of the Rantzerker, and we will talk to you all in the next video.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.